moment seemed to split the air in two. Pam Bondi leaned forward, her voice tearing through the chamber like a siren. "Stop talking." The words ricocheted off the marble walls, louder than the gavel, sharper than the tension already boiling in the room. For a split second, everything froze. Aides glanced at each other in disbelief. Cameras jolted closer, and the audience watching from home sat forward in their chairs, caught between outrage and fascination. It wasn't just the volume, it was the tone, dripping with condescension, charged with entitlement, meant not just to silence but to humiliate. You could feel the oxygen get sucked out of the chamber, as if the whole country had been shoved into that single deafening command. Some in the room shifted uncomfortably. Others smirked, waiting to see if Bondi's outburst would dominate. But most, whether they dared admit it or not, felt the sting of those two words echo against deeper wounds. How often voices like Crockett's had been told to sit down, stay quiet, disappear. The cameras didn't blink. The crowd didn't breathe. And in the eye of that storm stood Jasmine Crockett, unshaken, her silence louder than Bondi's roar. What came next would not only upend the exchange, it would send shockwaves across the nation. But no one, not even Bondi herself, expected Crockett's calm reply. To understand why that outburst mattered, you have to step back from the heat of the chamber and look at the fault lines it exposed. This wasn't just a spat-over procedure, nor a passing flare-up of tempers. It was a collision between two Americas, one clinging to an old order where power is protected by volume and intimidation, and another demanding that respect, dignity, and truth carve out their rightful place. Pam Bondi, with her years of courtroom theatrics and reputation for bulldozing opponents, represented more than herself in that moment. She embodied the tradition of shouting down, of silencing, of using force where persuasion fails. To her supporters, it was strength. To everyone else, it was arrogance laid bare. And then there was Jasmine Crockett, the daughter of grit and sacrifice, a public servant who carried into that room the weight of communities long told they didn't belong at the table. She wasn't just fighting for her chance to speak. She was standing in for every voice dismissed, every story cut short, every person who had been told in one form or another, "Stop talking." The clash between Bondi and Crockett instantly became more than personalities. It was symbolic. Whose vision of America would prevail? The one where power means silencing, or the one where calm dignity commands the floor? Millions didn't yet know it, but they were about to witness a showdown that would ripple far beyond that chamber. The tension had only just begun to build, and every second pushed the stakes higher. Because Crockett's response wasn't just about defending herself. It was about rewriting the script of what happens when arrogance meets composure. And when she finally spoke, the world would listen. Pam Bondi didn't arrive in that chamber as an unknown figure. For years, her name had been synonymous with confrontation. As Florida's Attorney General, she cultivated a reputation as a fighter, the kind of politician who thrived on spectacle, who never shied away from the cameras, who leaned into combat as if it were her natural state. She was polished, ambitious, and never afraid to raise her voice if it meant dominating a headline. But behind that cultivated image of strength, there were shadows. Her career had been dogged by accusations of favoritism, of bending principles for allies, of wielding her office less like a servant of the people and more like a shield for the powerful. When critics pointed out conflicts of interest, she brushed them aside with the same dismissive air she carried into debates. To some, she was decisive. To others, she was the embodiment of entitlement dressed up as leadership. That contradiction, between the image she projected and the behavior she displayed, was on full display when she shouted, "Stop talking," at Jasmine Crockett. Here was a woman who had built her brand on law, order, and fairness, suddenly relying on the raw force of her voice to crush an opponent. The irony was impossible to miss, the so-called guardian of justice resorting to bullying in plain view. Bondi's strategy had always been volume. Overwhelm the opponent, seize the floor, flood the airwaves with sound until reason itself seemed drowned out. It had worked for her before, in courtrooms, in press conferences, in partisan battles where intimidation was half the game. But this time something was different. The cameras weren't blinking. The nation was listening, not just to the words, but to the tone. And that tone, sharp, patronizing, brimming with contempt, exposed something she had always managed to conceal. Fear. Fear that her dominance might not hold. Fear that someone like Jasmine Crockett, with her calm poise and unshaken presence, might pierce through the noise. In that moment, Bondi wasn't the commanding figure she wanted the world to see. She was the villain of her own performance unraveling in real time. Her strategy had always been volume, but this time, volume wasn't enough. This time, the outburst backfired, and standing across from her, waiting in silence, was the woman ready to prove it. Long before Jasmine Crockett's calm reply went viral, her story was already one of perseverance and grit. Born and raised in a community where opportunities were often scarce, she learned early what it meant to fight for recognition, to carve a path where doors seemed sealed shut. Her journey wasn't marked by privilege or shortcuts. It was marked by long hours, personal sacrifice, and a belief that service to others was worth every obstacle she faced. Crockett's path into public life began not with grand ambitions, but with a simple conviction that justice mattered. She trained as an attorney, representing those who had little voice in a system stacked against them. While others sought lucrative corporate careers, she took on clients who couldn't pay, standing in cramped courtrooms where the weight of systemic inequality was inescapable. She saw firsthand how easily the powerless were silenced, how quickly their rights could be dismissed with the strike of a gavel. Her activism grew from those moments. She marched, she organized, she built coalitions that refused to accept invisibility as the price of survival. But visibility came at a cost. Crockett endured smears, racist dog whistles, and attacks on her legitimacy. Critics questioned her right to lead, pundits dismissed her as too loud or too defiant, and opponents tried to frame her passion as aggression. Yet through it all, she refused to bend. Every insult, every attempt to diminish her only sharpened her resolve. Crockett's dignity wasn't an accident, it was forged in fire. She learned to meet rage with composure, to counter slander with truth, to turn every dismissal into proof of why her presence mattered. She didn't need to shout to be heard. Her very persistence was a declaration. By the time she walked into that chamber opposite Pam Bondi, Crockett carried not only her own story, but the stories of countless others whose voices had been drowned out. She carried the weight of ancestors who had been told to step aside, of immigrants who had been told to go back, of women who had been told their place was anywhere but here. It wasn't just about politics, it was about presence, about showing that dignity once earned cannot be erased by volume. So when Bondi erupted with her command to stop talking, Crockett was already prepared. Every courtroom she had stood in, every smear she had endured, every barrier she had broken down, it all led here. Everything she had endured prepared her for this exact confrontation, and when she finally chose to speak, her words would do more than defend herself. They would redefine the moment entirely. The chamber was never quiet for long. As soon as Jasmine Crockett began to speak, Pam Bondi lunged back in, her voice slicing through the air like broken glass. "That's not the point," she barked, talking over her, each interruption louder than the last. The clash of voices bounced off the walls until the room itself felt restless, as if it couldn't contain the heat radiating between them. Bondi leaned forward again, shoulders squared, voice raised high enough to drown out every attempt at reason. The camera zoomed in, catching every flash of frustration on her face, every forced smirk meant to project dominance. Each time Crockett opened her mouth, Bondi was there, pressing harder, volume piling on volume. And yet, Crockett did not flinch. Her eyes stayed steady, her posture calm, her expression unbothered. She let the storm rage, her silence an unspoken challenge. In a room addicted to noise, she held her ground by refusing to be rattled. You could feel the tension crackling. Staffers shifted nervously. Journalists scribbled furiously in their notebooks, knowing something bigger was unfolding. Viewers at home leaned in, their screens glowing with anticipation. The chamber itself seemed to tighten, every breath shorter, every pause sharper. Bondi's voice grew more desperate with each interruption, as though sheer volume could substitute for substance. Her strategy was clear: overwhelm, destabilize, dominate. But the contrast was undeniable. The more chaotic Bondi became, the more composed Crockett appeared. It wasn't just a debate anymore. It was a visual parable, arrogance, unraveling against the weight of dignity. Then, in the middle of the chaos, something shifted. The room teetered on the edge of boiling over, the noise building to a near unbearable crescendo. And just when it seemed the clash would spiral out of control, Crockett leaned forward ever so slightly, her calm breaking through the turbulence. The room hushed, almost involuntarily, as if everyone sensed what was about to happen. And then, Crockett's reply cut through the noise like lightning. The chamber had reached a fever pitch. Voices clashed, tempers flared, and for a moment it seemed the uproar would never end. But then, Jasmine Crockett lifted her chin, breathed in slowly, and spoke. Not loudly, not with fury, with calm. Her words flowed evenly, each syllable chosen with surgical precision, slicing through the chaos without ever needing to rise above it. "Are you finished?" she asked, her tone as steady as steel. No shouting, no fire, just quiet certainty. The effect was immediate. Murmurs rippled through the chamber. A few heads turned sharply as if caught off guard by the audacity of her composure. Bondi, mid-gesture, froze. The command that had filled the room seconds earlier now hung in the air like a stranded echo, powerless against Crockett's measured voice. Crockett let the silence work for her. She paused, scanning the room with calm defiance, giving the cameras all the time they needed to capture the unflinching confidence on her face. Every pause stretched longer than Bondi's loudest interruptions, every second of quiet a declaration that she would not be moved. Then she continued, her voice still even, "Because I will continue to speak, and you will not silence me. Not today. Not ever." Gasps broke out, followed by a ripple of applause that some tried and failed to stifle. Aides exchanged wide-eyed glances, reporters scribbled frantically, and the spectators at home could almost feel the temperature of the chamber drop. Bondi tried to interject again, but her voice cracked, a half-formed interruption that collapsed under its own weight. Crockett pressed on, her cadence deliberate, each line a counterstrike. She didn't match Bondi's volume, she dismantled it. Every word exposed the emptiness behind the shouting. Every phrase magnified the imbalance between arrogance and authenticity. You shout because you have no answer. You interrupt because you cannot stand what's being said. But your noise does not make you right. It only makes you loud. The chamber stirred again. Some leaned back with quiet smirks, others whispered to their neighbors. Even Bondi's own allies shifted uncomfortably in their seats, as if realizing the spectacle was slipping away. Crockett paused once more, her eyes locking onto Bondi's with unshakable resolve. "You told me to stop talking," she said, her voice lower now, almost a whisper, but the kind of whisper that travels further than a scream. "But I'm here to tell you, we've been told to stop talking for generations, and still, we are here. Still, we speak. And no amount of shouting will erase that truth." The weight of her words landed like thunder after lightning. Bondi's face tightened, her confidence cracking with each passing second. She tried to summon her trademark glare, but it faltered under the glare of the cameras and the rising tide of murmurs swelling around her. Crockett leaned back, her statement complete, her composure intact. The room, once boiling with noise, now hummed with the unmistakable realization that a line had been drawn and crossed, not by Bondi's aggression, but by Crockett's unshakable calm. And in that moment, Crockett didn't just respond. She rewrote the rules of the exchange. The moment Crockett's words cut through the chamber, the clip was already on its way to the world. Within minutes, phones buzzed, timelines filled, and hashtags erupted across every platform. Stop Talking wasn't trending the way Bondi might have imagined. It was being reclaimed, twisted into a rallying cry, a badge of resistance. Alongside it came Crockett Calm and Dignity Speaks, climbing the charts as millions hit replay on the now viral exchange. The numbers soared. First a few thousand views, then millions. On TikTok, the clip was set to music, slowed down at the exact moment Crockett leaned in with her devastating calm. On Twitter, screenshots of Bondi's frozen expression were paired with captions like, "When volume meets dignity, dignity wins." Memes spread like wildfire, mocking Bondi's red-faced fury against Crockett's serene composure. Commentators couldn't resist. Cable news anchors dissected the moment frame by frame, pointing out the irony of a seasoned figure like Bondi unraveling before a freshman lawmaker's measured voice. Progressive talk shows hailed Crockett's response as the perfect antidote to political bullying. Even conservative pundits, scrambling to spin the clip, admitted it was a bad look for Bondi. And then came the celebrities, the activists, the cultural influencers. Musicians tweeted lines from Crockett's reply. Civil rights leaders applauded her composure. Everyday viewers uploaded reaction videos, some in tears, others laughing in disbelief at Bondi's meltdown. It wasn't just politics anymore. It was culture. Crockett had become a symbol of what it meant to resist intimidation with grace. Meanwhile, Bondi's name trended too, but not in the way she'd hoped. Late-night comedians pounced on her outburst, imitating the shrill command with exaggerated glares and mock meltdowns. Hashtags branded her not as the strong voice she wanted to be, but as the meme of the week, the cautionary tale of what happens when arrogance collides with authenticity. The world was watching, and this time the calm voice won. The ripple effects were undeniable. Young activists saw validation in Crockett's moment, sharing the clip as proof that dignity could still pierce through noise. Immigrants and marginalized communities saw themselves in her refusal to be silenced. For once, the viral spotlight wasn't rewarding outrage. It was rewarding restraint, composure, truth. And as the clip spread further, one question hung in the air. If calm could conquer chaos here, what could it conquer next? What Jasmine Crockett accomplished in that chamber wasn't just a personal triumph. It was a national revelation. Her reply stood as proof that politics doesn't always belong to the loudest voice in the room. Sometimes, the true power belongs to the one who refuses to be shaken. For generations, voices like hers had been pushed to the margins, told to wait, told to quiet down, told to accept less. Bondi's outburst echoed that old script. The voice of privilege demanding silence from the voice of change. But Crockett didn't just resist it. She rewrote it. In her calm, she declared that dignity speaks louder than domination, that truth carries further than arrogance, that calm will always outlast yelling. Her words resonated because they reached beyond the chamber. They spoke to teachers silenced in classrooms, workers ignored in boardrooms, immigrants dismissed at borders. Women told their place was anywhere but power. Crockett's presence in that moment transformed into a mirror, reflecting back to millions of Americans that they too had the right to speak, the right to stand, the right to be heard. It wasn't only a political victory, it was a cultural one. At a time when outrage often drowns out reason, Crockett reminded America that silence can be more devastating than noise, and that a single calm sentence can shake the ground beneath a scream. In that chamber, America was reminded that silence can roar louder than shouting. Her triumph wasn't measured by Bondi's retreat, but by the millions who saw themselves in her steadiness. She didn't just defend her right to speak, she defended the right of every silenced voice to rise. And as the nation replayed her words, one truth became clear. Arrogance can burn bright for a moment, but dignity endures. Pam Bondi yelled, "Stop talking!" But it was Jasmine Crockett's calm reply that the world couldn't stop sharing. What began as an attempt to silence turned into a viral testament that dignity, when wielded with courage, can silence arrogance more completely than shouting ever could. This wasn't just a clash in one chamber. It was a reminder that in every arena, whether political, personal, or cultural, calm composure has the power to upend chaos. Crockett's moment proved that the values we want to see in our leaders and in ourselves are not about who can yell the loudest, but who can stand their ground with grace. And that's the story worth carrying forward. Arrogance burns fast, but dignity endures. If you felt the power of Crockett's reply, if you saw yourself reflected in her refusal to be silenced, then don't let this moment fade. Share this story. Subscribe so you never miss the next time dignity rises against noise. And most of all, add your voice to the chorus, proving that calm can still conquer chaos. Because America heard Crockett that day, and the world is still listening.